She bent down to plug in her charger. That's when she saw him. A grown man, curled up under the bed, staring straight at her. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Her body locked up. Her brain froze. He didn't move. He just kept watching her. Silent. Still. Like he'd been there for hours. And he had. It was a typical evening in Great Bend, Kansas. The babysitter, a young woman in her early 20s, had been entrusted with the care of 2 children in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The parents had left for the night, leaving her with clear instructions. Dinner had been served, homework completed, and bedtime was set for 9 p.m. The house was cozy, filled with the familiar clutter of a family home. Children's toys scattered in the living room, family photos lining the walls, and the faint aroma of a home-cooked meal lingering in the air. As the evening progressed, the babysitter engaged the children in calming activities, reading stories, playing quiet games, to wind them down before bed. The younger child, a boy of about 6 years old, was particularly apprehensive about bedtime. He had always been wary of the dark, often expressing fears of monsters lurking in the shadows of his room. Tonight was no different. As she tucked him into bed, he clutched his favorite stuffed animal tightly and whispered, "Can you check for monsters under the bed?" Smiling reassuringly, she nodded. "Of course, there's nothing to be afraid of," she said, kneeling beside the bed. She lifted the bed skirt, ready to dispel his fears with a quick glance. But the moment she lifted the bed skirt, her smile vanished. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a trick of the light. There was a man. A real man. Curled up under the child's bed, face partially shadowed, but unmistakably there. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just stared up at her with wide, bloodshot eyes, completely still, like he'd been waiting. She dropped the bed skirt immediately and stumbled backward, heart pounding so hard she could barely think. But she didn't scream. Her instincts kicked in fast. She calmly told the child to get up, acting like nothing was wrong. "Come on, let's have a little snack in the kitchen," she said, her voice trembling under the surface. The boy hesitated, but followed. She grabbed his hand and guided him down the hallway, then bolted out the front door and ran to the neighbors. Once outside, she called 911. Police arrived within minutes. She explained everything, nearly in tears. Officers entered the home cautiously, expecting the man to have fled, but he hadn't. He was still under the bed, exactly where she left him. According to the officers, he didn't resist arrest. He just crawled out, hands in the air, and said softly, "I'm not here to hurt anyone." But what they found next made this story go from disturbing to deeply unsettling. The man's name was Matthew C. Muller. He was 24 years old, unemployed, and had no known connection to the family or the neighborhood. He didn't live nearby. He wasn't a friend of the parents. He was, by all accounts, a complete stranger. When police searched him, he had no weapons, no drugs, no stolen items, just a flashlight, a half-empty water bottle, and a notebook filled with scribbled writing. Some of it looked like journal entries. Other pages were filled with what investigators later described as disturbing observations, as if he had been keeping notes on the family's routines. The terrifying question was, how long had he been in the house? Detectives believe he had snuck in through an unlocked back door sometime earlier that day, or possibly even the night before. He had food wrappers and an energy drink can stashed under the bed with him, suggesting he'd prepared to stay hidden for a while. But this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Once the man was in custody, police ran his name and found similar incidents linked to him in other towns. In one case, a woman in Wichita reported hearing footsteps in her attic, only for police to find a makeshift sleeping area weeks later. In another, a couple in Topeka discovered a man living in their crawl space after their dog kept barking at the vents. And in every situation, it was the same pattern. The man never tried to rob or hurt anyone. He just hid, sat silently in people's homes for hours or days without anyone noticing. He was eventually charged with burglary and trespassing, but not with attempted assault or kidnapping because he never made a move. His lawyer later claimed that Muller suffered from severe mental illness and delusions, that he believed he was protecting the families he hid near, that he wasn't a predator, just disturbed and desperately disconnected from reality. But for the babysitter, for the child, and for the family who came home to discover a stranger had been inside their home, it didn't matter. The damage was already done. After the arrest, the family changed the locks, installed cameras, and tried to move on, but the incident left deep emotional scars. The child refused to sleep in his own room for months. The babysitter quit babysitting altogether, reportedly seeking therapy for anxiety and paranoia. But then came the part that no one expected. A few weeks after the arrest, the family started reviewing their home security footage, newly installed but also retroactively synced with their cloud-based smart doorbell system. And in that footage, they saw something horrifying. The man had been watching the house long before the night he got caught. There were multiple instances of him walking up to the front door, peeking through windows, sometimes even standing motionless on the porch for several minutes at a time. He had visited the house on at least 3 separate nights before the night he hid under the bed. Even more disturbing, on one of the clips, he was seen crouching behind a bush at the edge of their yard, just watching for hours. He wasn't casing the house for a robbery. He wasn't looking for valuables. He was observing them, studying them. It raised a question that still haunts everyone involved. Was this random, or was it planned? Police couldn't answer that. The man was never able or willing to explain his motives. He just kept repeating the same thing. I wasn't going to hurt them. But for the people he hid near, for the babysitter, the boy, the parents, intent didn't matter. He was already inside the house, already under the bed, and no one knew for how long. This wasn't just an isolated break-in. It was part of a disturbing behavioral pattern that law enforcement and psychologists have seen before. People who suffer from what's known as phantom boarder syndrome, or intruder delusion. But in Muller's case, it wasn't a delusion. He was the phantom. He chose to live like a ghost inside people's homes, often just feet away from the families he watched. What's worse is how incredibly common these types of cases are, and how rarely we hear about them. In 2008, a man in Japan installed security cameras in his home after noticing food kept disappearing from his fridge. What the footage revealed shocked him. A woman had been secretly living in one of his cupboards for over a year, sneaking out only when he left for work. She had a blanket, a water bottle, and had even carved out a shelf for herself inside the closet. In another case from South Carolina, a woman discovered her ex-boyfriend had been living in her attic for 2 weeks. He'd rigged the air vents so he could watch her in her bedroom, and came down only when she was asleep or at work. The only reason he was caught was because she heard a thud above her ceiling and assumed it was a raccoon. Stories like these keep happening, and they all share one terrifying truth. Most of the time, the victims never know they're not alone until it's too late. And that's what makes the Kansas babysitter's story so chilling. She wasn't targeted as a person, she just happened to be there when he was hiding, which raises the most disturbing part of all. What if she hadn't gone to plug in her phone? What if she hadn't lifted the bed skirt? How long would he have stayed? Would he have left in silence like he had before? Or would the presence of a child, a vulnerable, sleeping child, have changed what he was willing to do? No one has that answer, not the police, not the family, not even Muller himself. There's something uniquely terrifying about the idea that someone could be in your home, watching you without you ever knowing. No broken windows, no missing items, no sound, just silence. That's what makes this story so unforgettable. It's not just about a break-in. It's about how thin the line really is between safety and danger, between normal and unthinkable. Sometimes the scariest things aren't the monsters in a child's imagination, but the ones lying quietly under the bed, hoping you'll never look. Click on the video on your screen now if you want to know what happened when 3 men were found guilty of stealing a solid gold toilet from a palace in England. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos that prove what happens when logic fails.